very uh, very relevant to my journey in that, my whole life has been about working out how to see, feel, and exist beyond the pain, and also now to help my clients to do the same thing. I didn't want the surgery. They wanted to do a fusion. I understood already that, the purpose of the spine is to be able to move, to articulate and move. So basically, through learning more about the body and how to strengthen it, I managed to heal myself largely. And then that gave me the motivation to try and help other people, not to go through what I'd been through with long-standing chronic pain issues.
Welcome to Beyond the Pain, the podcast that explores what it really takes to break free from chronic pain and reclaim your life. I'm your host, Leigh Brandon, and someone who's spent over 2 decades helping people get to the root cause of pain that no one else could explain. Whether you're dealing with long-term back issues, joint pain, nerve discomfort, or mysterious symptoms that just won't go away, this show is here to help you go deeper. Because beyond the pain, there's clarity, strength, and power waiting for you. Each week, we'll uncover the physical, emotional, biochemical, and energetic causes of pain and how to transform them. Let's dive deep into this week's episode. When persistent pain continues despite treatment, exercise, or attempts to correct the physical problem, it may be worth asking whether something else is influencing the body. My guest in this episode is my good friend and fellow Czech practitioner, Peter Strange, who has spent much of his life exploring the relationship between physical pain, unresolved emotions, the nervous system, and what he describes as non-local connection. After experiencing serious knee and spinal injuries as a teenager, Peter's search for answers eventually led to him to develop the reset method, realigning emotions and structure for energetic transformation. In our conversation, we explore how emotional experiences may influence pain, why scans and structural findings do not always tell the full story, and whether remote healing can help create change in the body. Some of Peter's ideas sit outside conventional medical thinking, but they raise important questions about how much we still have to learn about pain, healing, and the connection between body and mind. So let's explore. Peter, welcome to Beyond the Pain. Great to have you on the show.
Hi, Lee. It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. So, Peter, I know you know the format of the show because I know you've listened to an episode or two. So just to kick the things off, can you describe your own journey with pain? I know that's been quite a big journey for you, and how were you able to overcome it and how that experience inspired the work that you're doing now around non-local connection and healing?
Okay, a few questions there. Well, first of all, you're right. I probably have watched almost every episode of the podcast, and it's very relevant to my journey in that, my whole life has been about working out how to see, feel, and exist beyond the pain, and also now to help my clients to do the same thing. And even my company logo, it's my initials PS, which also stands for Pain Solutions. And if you flip it on its side, it looks like an x-axis with a sine wave, uh, signifying being out of and coming back into balance. Um, which is all about you know what pain is, a signifier for, and how we then address that. So my journey, I suppose, the most logical place to start would be when I was 13 years old. So when I was 13 years old, I was a very keen athlete. I was doing well in a number of different sports. That was really my whole life. That was my big passion in life. And I took part in it was a school sports day. I was taking part in a long jump competition, and I took my first jump. It was probably the best jump I ever did. Almost came out the other end of the pit. And when I did try and get up and walk out of the pit, my knee just gave way. And within about half an hour, it had swollen to twice its size. I knew I'd done something pretty serious. I couldn't take another jump, although I did finish second in that competition. Um, but basically, through the treatment for this knee injury, which I subsequently found out was two ligaments being ruptured, also meniscus tear. So a pretty bad injury. But in the course of the treatment, it was discovered that I also had a more serious back injury, um, which was a spondylolisthesis at my L5S1 junction, which is a forward slippage of S5, the actual vertebrae itself on S1, and you have a bilateral pars fracture, like a stress fracture on either side of the spine. So quite a serious injury. They didn't know whether it was congenital, something I was born with, or whether it was something caused by a trauma. I don't think it was caused by the long jump, but I had an incident playing football about 6 months prior where I landed awkwardly from a header and had to be stretched off the pitch with back pain, almost paralytic. I was paralyzed with pain, but it passed after about 20 minutes. Didn't think much of it. Uh, Anyway, so I was actually, as a result of this, I was banned from all sport for a whole year. I was told I may never play again at the same level. I was offered surgery. Even intuitively at that age, at 13, I kind of knew that wasn't the right path to take. I didn't want the surgery. They wanted to do a fusion, and I understood already that the purpose of the spine is to be able to move, to articulate and move. So that never felt right to me. So anyway, I probably spent my the rest of my teenage years, my early 20s, trying to resolve this pain. I had chronic pain issues. I couldn't stand for long periods. I did get back to playing sport, but never quite at the same level. And I tried everything, conventional approaches, alternative therapies, and nothing really helped. I mean, probably the only thing that helped to some extent was I found an Alexander teacher, someone who taught Alexander technique. That really did help me. That was very much about postural awareness and visualization, and there actually some techniques from that I still use with my clients today because it's very powerful. But it was only ever a temporary solution. It wasn't a permanent solution. And then in 1995, I got into the fitness industry, kind of by accident, um, but I loved it. And yeah, basically, through learning more about the body and how to strengthen it, I managed to heal myself largely. And then that gave me the motivation to try and help other people, not to go through what I'd been through with long-standing chronic pain issues. Um, so probably the next thing to mention would be, well, actually, in those early days, even though I didn't have anywhere near the knowledge that I have now, I was already attracting very complex clients. So I always had people with complex issues. I had very early in my career, I had three stroke survivors that came to me, which was amazing to work with people like that because there are no rules. No one's, no two brains are wired the same. They get people who have a stroke get literally written off by the medical industry, and so there's no sort of standard protocol for how to work with these people. So you really have to think outside the box. Got some amazing results. I had one guy who he was a ex-soldier, very, very fit, and basically he'd been told that he'd never walk again without a stick. And he came to me and said, "I want to run." And I was like, "Okay, let's do it." He was very positive. I don't know why I believed I could do it, and it took us 9.5 weeks to get him running again, which is incredible. And that was really through uh, understanding how neuroplasticity works, how you can retrain different parts of the brain to take on different functions. But mainly, I'd say it was through the power of belief. As Bruce Lipton says, beliefs shape biology. And I listened again to your podcast with Paul Check, your recent podcast with Paul Check, and kind of what he's saying at the beginning there in maybe a much more comprehensive way is that we literally create our body with our mind. Um, so yeah, I had some amazing experiences there. And then about 5 years into working in the fitness industry, oh no, sorry, probably 9 years actually. So 2004, I had a major, what I class as a spiritual awakening. I was working in a gym in Covent Garden in central London, and there were these Shaolin monks, Chinese monks, that were renting the studio there. And I got curious. Ended up doing some classes, and then I did some private work with the Shifu, the master, and that just opened something up in me, which I'll explain a bit later, I think. But that was really the kind of genesis of me developing the work that I do now. Um, but also on the journey in terms of my own pain, I had other surgeries that I declined. So I had injuries to both knees where I was offered surgery, declined both of those. More recently, which I'll talk about probably a bit later, I had an appendicitis, which I was told that I could die if I didn't have surgery. I intuitively felt that that wasn't the path. Subsequently, I've completely healed. I'm not suggesting that, you know, people shouldn't consider surgery. Sometimes it is appropriate, but if you do your research and you understand your body, and, you know, a lot of times it's not necessary. Um, you know, and conventional medicine really, it's, you know, usually just masking or removing the pathology. It's not addressing the root cause. You know, we do have the power to heal ourselves, and sometimes that's just through acknowledging and acting upon the messages delivered by the pain. Um, you know, and when we become a victim of our pain and we feel we need to be fixed, we're giving that power away. You know, so um, yeah, I think I mean this recent story of my appendicitis, that's quite interesting because I had three doctors standing over me. I was in a hospital bed, feeling pretty helpless and a lot of pain, and um, basically they really put a lot of pressure on me. You know, but I'd been in A&E for about 12 hours at that point, and I'd done loads of research, and I knew that the more recent opinion around this is that actually, um, you know, if there's no major infection, you know, antibiotics can be enough. You don't necessarily need a surgery, although 98% of people still have the surgery, which is incredible, you know, to actually remove a part of your body that's really essential, you know. So, um, yeah, it was really interesting. I'd done my research, and all these doctors were pressuring me, and I basically took back my power and said, "Look, I know what's going on. I know this isn't just about my appendix. I know it's more systemic. I've been getting gut pain for a while my whole, you know, uh, abdominal area, not just the appendix. And I was under a lot of stress at the time. And I just decided, you know, I'm going to heal myself. I know what's gone on here. I know how to heal myself. And I stood my ground. And what was really interesting was that when they ultimately relented and walked out of the room, my pain instantaneously dropped by 80%, you know, straight away. As soon as I took my power back and they walked out of the room, which was really, really interesting to me. So yeah, I probably occasionally do still get pain in my back and occasionally with my knee, but I recognise the signs now and I know how to address them.
Interesting. You mentioned a little bit about your back, and it might have been congenital. It might have been involved, with your football and going up for the header, etc. Do you have any thoughts on what might have caused your knee injury?
Yes, I do. I mean, I was going to come to this later, but yeah, I'll talk to you about it now. So it took me a long time to figure this out, if I'm honest with you. So yes, you know, as I said, through my work in the fitness industry, I figured out how to get stronger, how to balance my body on a structural level. You know, so I had a good understanding of that, you know, quite early on. But in terms of the emotional component to this, probably didn't fully figure that out. I kind of pieced together bits of it over the years, but I probably didn't fully figure it out until maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Uh, you know, I'm 52 now. So um, it's quite interesting. I was working with a colleague of ours, Warren Williams. He had a famous athlete that he was training. And this is 2012 in preparation for the London Olympics. And he'd got her into the best shape of her career at the end of her career. And she would enter a qualifying competition, and every time she'd enter a qualifying competition, she'd break down with another mystery injury, and it was crazy. Like we couldn't figure this out, and so he got me involved. I did some work with her. First session I did with her, she came sort of limping in on crutches, walked out the room afterwards as though nothing was wrong, and then she did the next qualifying competition, and the same thing happened. Broke down with another injury, and I thought, okay. something strange is going on here. I've done everything that normally do. I think I understand what's going on a physical level, um, but it's kept on happening. So through talking to her, I realized that the issue was largely emotional. It was a combination of things that had happened in her childhood and also a fear of failure, but also, which is quite common, a fear of too much success because in with what she was doing and being who she was, if does very well, she gets a lot of attention, a lot of media attention. It's very overwhelming. So she was kind of caught in this between a rock and a hard place. And once we figured this out, we were able to work on that. And she did actually manage to do the next competition, the last qualifying competition, with no bad reaction, no injuries. And she missed out on qualifying, I think, by a tiny margin. One of the other girls just broke her personal best and get to go, but she didn't suffer any further injury.
What's interesting, because I obviously know who you're talking about. I'm good friends with her, but um, she also had a spondy and she also had knee injury, right?
There was a lot of parallels, and I also my knee injury was in the long jump as well,
Yeah.
which was her sport.
Mm.
Um, so anyway, through this experience, I kind of figured out that the emotions were a really important piece, and it was around that same time. I think the same year, I was seeing someone myself. I was seeing another practitioner that I'd been recommended to see, more for the emotional side of things. She does something a bit different to me, but I had this one session with her, and I had this sudden epiphany. Like I just suddenly, I actually broke down in tears because I suddenly realised, and I kind of knew this, but it became so absolutely obvious that I'd created these injuries to help repair the relationship with my father. Um, my parents had a very dysfunctional relationship when I was kind of what got really bad at that sort of time in my early teens, and um, I'd never really established a particularly good relationship with my father. He wasn't, there was no abuse or anything like that, but he was always very busy. He kind of felt maybe a little inadequate as a parent, so he left my mum to, deal with the parenting duties, and we never really had a particularly great relationship. And I've got a fantastic relationship with him now because we've really worked on healing this. But um, he he had, I was aware that he had insecurities about his own physicality. He'd never been particularly good at sports or anything like that, and he uh, he never really came to support me. He would never, he'd never play with me when I was younger, growing up. I think because he felt a bit insecure about himself, and funny enough, he always used to use the excuse of having back pain. Um, which may have been true, but it felt like an excuse to me at the time. And so I think, if I'm honest, it was a misguided attempt for me to level the playing field with my father to kind of, be able to have a better relationship with him and also repair, my parents' relationship. And this is a sort of common theme that I see with a lot of my clients, really. But as I said, it took me probably about 30 years to fully figure this out.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. I was just thinking about, because my dad wasn't particularly good at sport either. But to be fair, my dad did, he used to take me to football and stuff like that. And we did used to have a kickabout at home and stuff. Yeah, my dad actually told me when I was probably in my late 40s, that the reason he didn't praise me when I was young was because he was jealous of how successful I was.
Mm,
And I thought that was quite big to admit that,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting.
And I'll tell you something else quite interesting. When I had my appendicitis, it was a couple of years ago, I didn't realize again until quite some time after, maybe a few months after, that it had actually happened on the anniversary of my dad leaving home. So it was the 11th of November, 11/11. I, for a long time, I've been seeing these numbers, 11/11, and you hear about the angel numbers. And I knew there was some significance to it, but it never clicked. It never clicked, and I then went back through my life and actually like break many of my breakdowns of various relationships. losing jobs before I was self-employed, and a lot of the major traumas of my life actually seem to happen around that 11th of November time, which is exactly a week after my birthday. Um, and yeah, realizing this when I had this appendicitis, that digesting things properly. Yeah, and obviously the appendix is linked to the immune system, which is about self-protection. Us protecting ourselves. Yeah, I guess it was only really, yeah, I've only recently had this realization, and I think now I've really completely healed this whole scenario with my dad. And now we get on absolutely great. He's actually one of my clients. He comes and sees me, fully trusts in the work that I do, and yeah, it's incredible. So it's all worked out.
Yeah, I'm laughing because my dad's the complete opposite. He kind of always jokingly, he'll be eating the worst thing in the world, and he'll say, "Oh, this is good for you," kind of sarcastically looking at me. Yeah, interesting. One of the things that I mentioned in the opening question was non-local
Oh yeah,
connection and
yeah,
healing. Can you explain to the audience what that means? If you've been living with persistent pain and have been told that it's simply due to wear and tear, degeneration, or an old injury, my book, Beyond the Pain, may help you see your situation differently. Pain is rarely influenced by just one thing. Structure matters, but so can inflammation, stress, sleep, nervous system sensitivity, emotional load, and the way you've been taught to think about your body. Beyond the Pain will help you explore these influences and begin identifying what may be preventing your recovery. You can find the paperback and ebook on Amazon by following the links in the show notes.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, do you think? I'm just wondering if I should talk about my sort of spiritual awakening experience, how that all
Yeah, can do.
started. Yeah. So I did this work with this Shaolin monk back in 2004, and he it was really an incredible experience. So we were sat cross-legged on the floor, about 6 feet away from each other, and he just smiled at me, and somehow there was a transmission of energy that occurred. I went into a spontaneous state when my body was releasing energy through movement. I had a massive emotional release. I had what I'd class as like a mini life review. I literally saw every event of my life flash before my eyes, kind of very, very quickly, and I had every human emotion sort of simultaneously. It was really incredible. And out of this experience, I found that I could enter this spontaneous state at will. So I'd find myself going. It's what the Chinese call the Wu Wei state. It's that's a Taoist kind of paradox. It means action, or Wei Wu Wei means action without action, or action through inaction, similar to like a flow state. Um, and so I was I'd find myself in this state where I could literally, it felt like I was manipulating linear time, like the world around me would be going slower and my thought processes would be accelerated. And I would act from this place of supreme knowing. And I downloaded lots of information. I was getting premonitions and all sorts of things at some.
Like the Matrix.
Yeah, very much, very, very much. But one of the things that came out of that is that I started to feel in my own body what was going on in the bodies of other people. It started happening with my clients. So I'd be training someone and I could sense something in my knee, for example, if they had an issue in their knee and maybe they hadn't even told me, and I just would know the right words to say and the right cues to give to kind of, help them to address that, whilst they were exercising. And I guess, I realized very quickly that I was supposed to be doing healing work. And I suppose the problem that I then came up against was that I didn't know how to explain that, because I'd always been very scientific in my approach prior to that. Um, and I even went to the extent of going back to college studying human biology, even though I had a sports studies A level, and went and did a work experience in a hospital, because these were the prerequisites for becoming a physio. I kind of thought maybe I need to be a physio. But I very quickly realised that I'd be really constrained if I did that. So um, I I think about a year after I had that experience, I came into some inheritance, and I decided to. I closed down my business. I had a really successful personal training business, and I went over to the States and I started. I did all the check courses that I'd always wanted to do and not never been able to before that. And I think back then you couldn't do most of the higher level courses over here, even some of the lower level ones. So I went out there, um, and lots of amazing experience out there. I really, because I was able to access this state, I was really kind of following my intuition. I learned neuromuscular therapy out there because I knew that Paul Check had learned neuromuscular therapy through the St. John method. So I went and studied that. Um, and quite interestingly, the videos that we studied, the model, the male model that was on the videos, I found out that he'd become an energy healer. He was working locally. I went to see him. Interestingly, he before the session, he got me to write an essay about my relationship with my father, and this was before I figured any of the other stuff out, which is quite interesting. You know, I didn't tell him anything about that. And then I went and did. I remember Chris Maund, he was the instructor when I was doing level one at the Czech Institute, and he mentioned an organisation that puts on various seminars in various parts of the states. Straight after level one, I went up to San Francisco. I did this course in something called IMT. It stands for Integrative Manual Therapy, but it's basically it was a genius lady that had come up with this thing. It combines various osteopathic techniques, muscle energy for joints, strain counter strain for muscles, visceral techniques for organs, cranial techniques for the central nervous system. But the main thing that it does is it looks at the fascia, because the fascia obviously envelops and influences the position and tension and pressure in all of the other structures, So um, that's a big cornerstone of what I do today. I learned some very subtle energy, sensitive techniques for feeling what's going on in the fascia. Um, and then I did something called, when I came back to the UK in 2008, I did something called Oriental Body Balance, which is now called Core Therapy, Kore. And that combined kinesiology and qigong energy healing and cranial techniques, and also things like NLP and all sorts of things. And I just love the kinesiology part of it because it was so definitive. You could find a weakness. If you know how to correct it, you could correct it. It's instantaneous. The client gets like a physiological and psychological boost straight away. You know, um, so I went and learned everything I could about kinesiology. Got every book I could find. There was also qigong energy healing techniques, which I loved as well. So I learned everything I could about that. And yeah, then I developed, after working with Warren's client, I developed the emotional component of it. So I discovered that through reading kinesiology books, I learned about these emotional neurovascular points on the forehead. Um, and I found that you could make corrections structurally, but then if you put these points into the equation and retested the previously weak muscle that you'd strengthened, if the issue was emotionally driven, it would go weak again. Um, because yeah, I think with these points, I mean, I could feel expansion and contraction in those points. Um, and what's happening when you stimulate these points? You're shunting blood to the forebrain. It helps to retrieve memories from the hippocampus. It allows the amygdala to sort of deal with trauma more rationally, and it then connects that back into the motor system. So it cements the shift. So, I'd find that I'd get my clients to connect into these points whilst they were connecting with the part of the body where the injury was. And then, you know, things would naturally rise up in their consciousness and we could address it. And then the muscle would go strong and you can feel the shift instantaneously. You'd feel the tension leave the body. So all this just leads to the point where in 2015, I was working with someone who actually was on your show a while back, Lisa Tekeste. She came to see me as a client in 2015, and she'd come over from Canada, and she had a lot of stuff going on, both physical and emotional. We got her in a really good place, and she went back home. And 3 days after landing, she had a really bad accident, fell down some stairs, twisted her ankle. Her ankle swelled up to double the size. She showed me on camera, and she was in a, in a real state. It sent her into a sort of emotional tailspin, and kind of she called me up saying, I feel like everything's gone back to square one. I don't know what to do. Like, do you know anyone over here that can help me? Obviously, being with the Czech Institute, we know people all over the world. I said, look, I've been reading about quantum physics and non-local connection and using one patient as a surrogate for another patient, which is well known in kinesiology. So I said, and I kind of figured, like, why can't I use my own body as a surrogate? If I get out of my own way, if I can already feel things in my own body relating to my clients, if I tune into that, surely if I can feel it, I can also heal it through my own body. Um, I believe we're all connected. So we did the session. Probably halfway through, we were talking about some of the emotional issues, and literally the swelling went down instantaneously. Like, we could see it going down. Literally, it went down in front of her eyes. So um, that was confirmation to me that this, you know, remote healing really works. Um, and yeah, I suppose then the challenge was kind of figure out, how to explain that to people. Um, but yeah, going on to the sort of theory behind that, I think the concept of non-locality, it's been around for nearly 100 years now, in quantum physics. There's laws such as the law of entanglement. And, what they found was you could have two particles, that were once connected. You could separate them, you could have them at great distance, and you could do something to influence one of the particles, and it would instantaneously influence the other one. Um, and they hypothesized that, either this was that photons were moving faster than the speed of light, which is probably not the case, or that separation is just an illusion, and that, we're all part of a greater interconnected whole, and we remain so despite changes in our relative position. My theory was, we all emanate from the same source. We're made of the same source material. We're all entangled to a greater or lesser degree. I think it was David Bohm. He's talked about a holographic universe, that, every point in space time is, contains information about every other point, which is the same as, our own DNA. Every cell contains the coding for our whole body. And then you've got the morphic resonance theory, Rupert Sheldrake, which suggests that, there's a record of what it is to be human contained in all humans. So I just took all of this kind of intuitive knowing and information that I'd read, and I thought, let's just try this thing. And yeah, as I said, it worked. I think for it to work, your own frequency needs to be at least, level, or, a higher level to that of the client. Both parties have to hold the intention for healing. The client has to be open and receptive to the process. Some people aren't ready to heal, so that you have to obviously understand. But I think, when I do this work, I believe I'm connecting on a soul level. I think the soul only reveals what's ready and safe to be healed. Um, and yeah, it seems to work.
Mm. Yeah, and there are so many modalities now, anyway, isn't there, that use not what you call non-local connection or remote healing. There are many modalities now that use that. So I don't think it's controversial to suggest that that's a thing, right? And like you said, when we think that we're separate, that's actually the illusion, right?
Mm,
We're all connected.
absolutely,
Um, and when you think that the world that we believe we live in is all based on our five senses, right? But certainly I believe there's way more beyond the five senses that we are not aware of,
absolutely,
you know?
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I can imagine it does help if someone has some level of belief in
I
in
mean,
remote healing.
it's not to say that it's impossible. It can't work without it, but I think it really, really helps.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, many years ago when I used to do the body talk system, one guy came to see me because he was skeptical and he thought I was a bit of a charlatan. And when I first interviewed him, I said, what have you got going on? He told me a few things, but he actually didn't tell me the main thing he had going on. And I did a treatment, and when he got off the table, he looked at me like, or what just happened because he actually had ankle pain.
Right.
They didn't mention it, and it didn't even come up in the session, but whatever came up managed to get rid of the pain, and it wasn't like a short-term thing, like, I knew him for months later and it
Yeah.
never came back. So yeah, it doesn't always have to person doesn't always have to believe
No, it's
in
funny.
those things.
You've actually just reminded me of a couple of funny stories actually, going back to my dad again. He was very skeptical of the work I do, early on, and, eventually I got him to I think, he had various problems with his back and what have you, and, I somehow convinced him to try and do something remotely at some stage because I couldn't get to him. And I did what I do, and he said, "Oh, that it really does feel different." But he goes, "I'm actually feeling pain somewhere else now. I bet you can't guess where it is." Um, and you just reminded me of that because it was his ankle. It was so obscure, and like that was what basically flipped it for him. As soon as when I told him, I think it's your left ankle, that was it. He was a believer. That was one story, and another story that it reminded me of is I had this one client one time. She came to me for various issues. It was all physical stuff, and we did the session. And I normally check in with people after a couple of days to see how things have integrated, see how they're feeling. And I called her up after a couple of days, and she said, "Do you know what? I feel really great, but I'm not happy with you." And I said, "Okay, what's the problem?" She goes, "Well, I've got a fridge full of wine, and I don't want it anymore." Right, and it turned out she was a really hardcore alcoholic. She'd actually been told she had to quit alcohol because her liver was so damaged. She never told me this. She kept it completely from me. Um, But my theory there was that, the work I do is all about creating wholeness and helping people to love themselves a bit more and, find who they really are. And I think, through her loving herself a bit more, she just didn't want to drink anymore, and I've seen this kind of thing happen time and time again. Um, so yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I definitely relate to what you were saying there.
Mm, yeah. So when we're talking about healing pain through the power of non-local connection, what does that mean in practical terms, and how does it relate to someone who is currently living with chronic pain? Perhaps you recognize that your pain is more complex than the diagnosis you've been given, but you're unsure which factors are the most relevant in your case. My approach looks beyond the painful area to explore the possible structural, nutritional, lifestyle, nervous system, and emotional influences that may be contributing to your symptoms. The aim is not simply to suppress the pain, but to understand why your body may still feel the need to protect you and what you can do to participate more actively in your recovery. To learn more or to secure a discovery call with me, follow the consultation link in the show notes.
I mean, I guess, you know, firstly, there are people out there that can help them. They don't necessarily have to have someone, local to them. There are people that can help them. I've come to the conclusion really that emotions are the biggest factor in pain. I really do believe that. It's not to say that there aren't always very often other factors, but I do think the emotions are kind of really running the show. Um, so uh, even if someone's not open to the idea of you know physical healing through across distance, um, you know, I think most people can buy into the idea that you know um, if you talk through your problems, it helps, and you don't have to have physical connection with someone to do that. Um, and a lot of the work I do, yes, I do things on a physical level. I work through my own body when I'm working remotely. I do feel stuff. I do sense stuff. I do try and transmit things. I try and create the right circumstances for the person's body and mind to heal. But at the same time, I'm doing a lot of talking with them, and I'm allowing them space to talk and be heard. And I think, yeah, that's what I would say to people is, even if you have someone that you trust that you can confide in and speak to. They don't have to be a healer, but that can in itself have a healing effect.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting again, just, going back to someone that might be skeptical of this kind of work. What I tend to use the analogy of, do you believe in Wi-Fi?
Right,
Right?
right.
You can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. But how well would your computer work without having Wi-Fi? It's not going to work at all, is it? Right? Well, I mean, unless you're offline, then you might have some stuff you can do offline, but you get the analogy, right? Or it could
Mm.
be Bluetooth, it could be 4G,
Well, we've
5G.
had radio waves for, most people alive now have had that. It's been in existence for their entire lifetime. How do you explain that?
Yeah. Yeah, because the music isn't coming out of the box, is it? Right? All the let's talk about the old fashioned radio. It would receive a radio signal and it would in some way interpret those messages, and through electronics and whatever else, it would send out perfect sound, right? Well, there's more to it than just radio waves,
Absolutely.
right? And you know, the radio is just the receiver, isn't it? Well, it's a receiver, but it's also going to send the music out. But it's receiving the radio waves and then just transferring them into what we know as actual sound.
Mhm.
And the way that I look at it in terms of remote healing, rather than a radio tower connecting to a radio, it's a person connecting to another person.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, another thing that's quite interesting is, I'd heard about this idea of using a surrogate in kinesiology. So often you say, for example, if you were treating a baby or an elderly or infirm person, someone who couldn't follow a command to pass a muscle test, you would do the work through someone who has a close emotional connection to the person. So it could be the mother of the baby or a relative or whatever. Um, no, so most people can buy into that idea. And like I said earlier, I kind of came to the conclusion, well, I think we're all connected. I think we're all part of a greater whole. So I don't believe I have to have an emotional connection with that person. And I'm establishing an emotional connection anyway when I talk to them. But actually, it can sometimes work better with someone who you're not close to because there's no emotional entanglement. There's nothing to be lost or gained through that transaction. Yeah, I mean, I've found sometimes some people respond better to the remote work than they do to in person. Everyone's different, but it's a fascinating field.
Yeah, absolutely. So you developed the reset method.
Hmm.
Can you explain what reset stands for, how it evolved over time, and what makes it different from more conventional approaches to physical pain?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, it's quite interesting. So when I started, kind of, well, something I didn't mention actually. So when I first developed, I've got a big system now that I use from, kinesiology. So I've got probably over 200 things that I look at, and because I like to be thorough, there was, in the early days of using the kinesiology, I would literally do every test on every person. And very early on in that process, and that's very time consuming, but very early on in that process, I realized I didn't have to do that. I'd go to pick up someone's arm or leg, and I could tell how it was going to test even before I did the test. Um, so I really learned to trust that because I could feel stuff in my own body relating to the people I was working with. I started experimenting with that. I started playing around with it. Back then, I was doing more personal training than I was therapies. So I'd be in the gym, I'd observe people doing exercises. I could see someone struggling maybe with a particular movement, and I'd kind of have a look and think, "Oh, okay, I wonder if that's because their external hip rotators are not firing, or So I'd run the tests through my own body, and I'd then go and approach the person. I'd say, "Look, I've watched you doing that exercise. I think I know why you might be finding that difficult. Can I just show you a couple of things?" And I'd get them on the floor and I'd do a couple of muscle tests, do the corrections, get them doing the exercise again. And, they'd be like, "Oh, this is amazing. I feel so much different, feel so much stronger." So I just learned to really, really trust that. And what that then led to me doing was doing an energetic reading on the client prior to the session, which really streamlined my process. It saved me a lot of time. So I'd tune in with the client's energy. I get them to complete various forms before they see me. So I have some insight into their background. And I'd do the reading prior to the session, turn up, and sure enough, all those imbalances would be there. And sometimes be very specific. And I'd even get specific words like names of people in their family or specific ages when things happened and things like that. So I just started really trusting this, and kind of out of that, I came up with this name, steer therapy, which was SEER, which was structural and energetic, or structural and emotional energetic realignment. Um, and then I had a client around that time that I did a session with her. She jumped off the table at the end. She goes, "Oh my God, it feels like you've pressed the reset button for my body and mind." And I was like, "Oh, I love that." I said, "Look, write me a testimonial. That's so cool. I love what you just said." So she wrote me a testimonial, and in that testimonial, she repeated the same thing, and she said, "And it's completely transformed my life." And I thought, transformation, that's T, like, so I don't know how I came up with this word. Like, I was in the shower actually one day. All my great inspirations come in the shower. I think it's to do with the flowing water, and you know, kind of helps my flow, in terms of getting information. And I suddenly realized, like, this word reset. She said, you press the reset button. It's the same letters as SEER, but with a T. And then that's where the transformation came in. So it stands for realigning emotions and structure for energetic transformation. And that's what I believe I'm helping to do for people.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Interesting. So, in your experience, is there always an emotional component to physical pain?
I personally think there is. It might not always be obvious. Obviously, sometimes we can have an accident, which could seem completely random in its nature. I think, again, if people listen back to your recent podcast with Paul Check, he goes into quite a lot of depth about this subject. Um, I yeah, I do think there's always an emotional component. Sometimes, as Paul said, it can be the soul or the higher self, taking advantage of the opportunity, but to get some learning and some growth. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the body and mind are inextricably linked. I think Candice Pert said that the body is an outward manifestation of the mind. Um, and in her research, she found that um, you can't really have a thought without it changing your internal biochemistry. Like literally every thought we have. So as I said earlier, we create our body and its responses. Even our posture influences our internal and external functions. It's linked to our emotional state inextricably. It's a two-way street, so if we adopt a depressed posture, we're going to feel depressed after a while. If we lift our chest and smile, and it's actually quite hard to be depressed, and that works in both directions. Um, I think, I've discovered, there's lots of people that have written about this. I think you had Ina Segal on here a few months ago. Louise Hay, Jacques Martel. I've got an amazing book by Jacques Martel. It's called Encyclopedia of Ailments and Diseases. That's an incredible book, and he goes into the metaphysical meaning behind almost every condition that you can imagine. As does Ina Segal. There's a lot of great writings on this. I kind of took a little bit from all of these places and kind of also developed my own system through kind of intuitive reasoning. And I've sort of been able to give meaning to every potential misalignment of each individual vertebrae, different cranial bones. Um, and I believe that the residue of trauma and incomplete or unprocessed emotions is literally stored in the tissues of the body, or at least it influences how those tissues develop and align themselves. And like I said earlier, when you release this, you can literally feel the tension leave the body sometimes. When you talk through an emotional issue with someone. Um, so I've got like a variety of techniques that I use to address this. But I think the main thing is just bringing bringing things to someone's conscious awareness, bringing these things that are deep in our subconscious up to our conscious awareness, and that's what the body is trying to do with pain. I think. Um, you know, um, yeah, I don't know if that has that answered your question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So, I've come to, I'm not going to say a conclusion because my mind's open to new information, but I see four main drivers of pain: structural, metabolic, nervous system regulation, and emotions. Um, but the longer the pain goes on, the more likely I believe it's emotionally driven. And I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I've had people come to see me, in my early days of my check training, the first 2 or 3 years, the only tool in my toolbox was corrective exercise, right?
Right. Right.
And from what I remember, I helped every single person in pain purely through corrective exercise. So, for someone, some people would suggest that it's always emotion driven. I think the reality is it's probably, particularly with persistent pain, that's the most common driver. I believe that's kind of my experience, and certainly based on a lot of the kind of research that I've done. I think there's certainly, when you look at nervous system regulation, you look at things like um, central sensitization. Again, there's definitely things that drive pain, but again, why is the nervous system hypervigilant? Well, that could be emotionally driven as well. So I kind of see the nervous system regulation thing not necessarily causal, but but an adaptation to other things that are influencing it.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I wouldn't say that emotions are always driving the pain issue, but they're certainly they're always a component in it, I believe. And you have to ask yourself, nothing happens without reason. You have to ask yourself, why is someone predisposed to a certain injury? So yes, there may be a trauma which is completely separate from all the other things that have on in their life. But because of all the other things that have gone on in their life, they're holding a certain energetic alignment that potentially predisposes them to these type of issues. Um, so yeah, it's complex, but
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely complex, and it's quite interesting we're having this conversation because I think every book I've read this year is on mind body medicine. Like I'm going deep down the rabbit hole at the moment on that. I just find that fascinating. I've got a whole load of books already lined up to read that's on the same subject. So yeah, I'm just acting like a bit of a sponge in that respect at the moment. So with regards to emotions, how can someone, or I should say, with regards to someone in pain, how can someone begin to recognize whether their pain has an unresolved emotional driver?
mm, okay. Um, well, there's various questions that you can ask yourself. I think through self inquiry we can really find out a lot. Um, So firstly, it's important to remember that, you know, having pain-free optimal health is our birthright. That's our default energetic state. Pain is a reminder of imbalance, and that a redirection of energies is required. And it's an opportunity, as we said, to take action and to change your life for the better. Um, so, I mean, I already mentioned about connecting with these emotional neurovascular points on the forehead. That can sometimes help someone to tune into, uh, you know, the origin of the pain. So connecting with those points and connecting with the relevant part of the body, and closing your eyes, and then using a method of self-inquiry. So asking questions like, when did I first become aware of the pain, and what was going on in my life? What part of my body is the pain in, and what meaning might this have? Under what circumstances does the pain get either better or worse? And what are my unmet needs? What are my unresolved traumas? Or what are my worries for the future? And also, on a more positive note, like, what was, is, or could be my passions? If I could really be doing what I want to do, if I could be living the best version of my life as the best version of myself, what would that feel like? What would that look like? You know, and then you can kind of work back from there. As Paul often says, if you have a big enough dream, you don't need a crisis, but you kind of have to know what the dream is, right? But a lot of people find that hard to connect with. So, as Paul says, what's the nightmare? And then work backwards from there. Because if something exists, its opposite must also exist. Um, and I guess the final question would be, this best version of you that lives the best version of your life. Which, if you can conceive of that, you're conceiving of your true self. You're conceiving of yourself in your full expression at your full potential. So that's probably closer to the real you than what you're experiencing when you're in pain. What would that version of you do in this situation? Or another way to phrase that is, what would love do now? If you truly love yourself and you love your life, what would you do on that basis? And that's how, a lot of people, when they get, say, a terminal diagnosis, they're able to turn things around, because they suddenly realize how precious life is. Um, yeah,
Yeah, and there's no plan B then, is there?
no plan B.
You can't duck out at that point. Well, you can,
Yeah,
but that's only going in one direction, right?
mm, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. So, what types of pain conditions have you seen the most success with using the reset method?
Yeah, so probably, the majority of cases that I get are neuromusculoskeletal issues. So it is more mechanical type issues. But I have had all kinds of different people come to me, and what I find is I'm addressing things on that level. So the nervous system, the muscular system, the skeletal system. I'm also addressing things energetically. So I reference the acupuncture meridians and the chakras. And as I said, I'm addressing things emotionally. And if I'm honest, I don't place a great emphasis on internal organ function, although obviously the acupuncture system, you know, is aligned with that, and the chakras are aligned with the hormonal system, and so I am indirectly addressing these things, but what I've found is that a lot of times, as like the lady with the drinking problem, you know, these secondary, or they might not be secondary issues, but someone might have a digestive issue or a hormonal imbalance or whatever. And actually, by correcting these other things, often they also correct. And, maybe if I'm not able to do that, I can refer out to someone like yourself or, but oftentimes I don't need to go any deeper. Um, so I get people coming to me with those types of issues, but a few recent cases that kind of blew me away, really. I had a lady with chronic tinnitus, which is notoriously difficult to resolve. Um, and I was able to help her. And that was really through helping her to become aware of where she wasn't listening, or the fact that she wasn't wanting to listen, in certain areas of her life. I had a guy with really bad rheumatoid arthritis in his hands, quite a young guy. I never, that was, this was purely remote. I never worked with him in person. And his rheumatoid arthritis cleared up after the first session. And we were just talking about his rigidity and his sort of emotional exchanges with himself and with other people. Um, the most profound one recently, I had a guy, he had like a progressive neurodegenerative disease, it's a terminal illness, basically. It's a little bit like Parkinson's disease. He's lost the ability to speak. He can't move very easily. He, he couldn't swallow. He really losing all his, abilities. And we worked on, and the difficult thing there was he couldn't talk to me. So we weren't able to have communication. But the first session I did with him, or one of the early sessions, we were talking about his ability to express his emotions and to come into acceptance of his condition. And basically, he burst out crying in the first session. And a few sessions in, he actually started talking again. He hadn't spoken for, I think it was a few years. Not consistently all the time, but when he was with close family members, that he hadn't seen for a while, he would find the ability to speak temporarily. Um, he used to have like a postnasal drip as well, so because he couldn't swallow, he was getting this constant drip at the back of his throat. He was constantly he couldn't swallow or cough, so he would have to, you know, like kind of tip his head down and spit into a tissue constantly. It was really, really debilitating. And that was really interesting. I basically I don't know if have you come across human design. So I'm quite interested in human design. I've not studied it, but I've looked into it quite deeply. And some of the things that were coming up in my readings and in the conversations of what I was having with him, it really reminded me of human design. It has a particular language. And so I thought, I don't know why, intuitively I felt I'm going to look at his human design. And I found various things in there that kind of pointed towards why someone like him might end up with a condition like this. And I literally had a dialogue with his soul about these issues in the session. And the postnasal drip stopped completely after that. It was incredible. So I mean, he's still. I don't work with him anymore. He still, has a lot of issues. We weren't able, obviously, completely return him to normal. But that was incredible to me that we could make a difference in those things that you might think wouldn't be possible to change. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just thinking about, a lot of the people that I've helped over the years, very similar kind of conditions. And as I've gone through my own development, you said, very early on in your career, you was always getting very complex people. I would say my journey was different in that from the beginning, the universe was sending me people that just had structural issues because I was fixing them purely using structure. And, some of those people I still know 25 years later, and the problem never came back. And I know there are some people that would suggest that it must have been emotional. It's like, well, how did that solve the problem then if we didn't work on the emotions? You know?
yeah. But I think because you have great belief in what you do. You instill confidence in people. I think that shouldn't be underestimated.
Mm.
If you're helping someone to realize their capabilities, and become more confident in their body and in their ability to use their body, and I think that in itself can have a massive impact in terms of how someone feels about themselves, how they deal with the stresses. So I think you are doing emotional work without realizing it. And, or you were,
Possibly.
you are now obviously more directly, but I think even then you were doing emotional work without realizing it. So it's quite funny. I bumped into someone I went to school with about 20 years after the last time I saw her. And, you have the conversation like, "Oh, what are you doing now?" She didn't, we hadn't spoken in 20 years, and I told her what I was doing, and she was like, "Oh, yeah, I always knew you were gonna do that." I was like, "How did you know that?" She goes, "Oh, you healed me when we were at school." And I was like, How did I do that?" I had no recollection of this. And she said, "Oh, well, we used to walk home from school together. I used to walk her home. She was having a lot of problems at home with her parents and stuff like that. And it was a purely platonic relationship, but we used to sit in this tree outside her house for hours just talking. And she'd tell me all her problems, and I'd just listen. And I'd completely forgotten it. But she said, you healed me. I wouldn't have got through my childhood without you. And to her, that was massive. I'd completely forgotten it. So I think, sometimes if we're just there, you know, to be with someone, to listen to them, to encourage them, I think that speaks volumes. That can create, great healing for people.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I think about my own back injury that I had, 13 years ago now, which, I've mentioned it many, many times on the show. Um, some people would suggest, because there's a lot of studies out there to show that, you can have quite a serious disc bulge, but it doesn't necessarily cause pain. And there are some people that would suggest the causation must therefore be emotional. Now, listen, I'm completely on board that emotions can cause pain, right? I'm completely on board. But even myself, I find it difficult to accept that my situation was due to an emotional thing. And again, when I look at the healing process, I was already doing the metabolic stuff. I was already doing the nervous system regulation stuff. But I just went back to, right, let's optimize my structure. And yes, it took time, but I got back to being completely functional. Didn't work on anything emotional necessarily. Um, yeah, I just think it's a really interesting.
Yeah, I think you did in a way because I've heard you tell that story, and you were battling to finish a book. I think you were putting in 18-hour shifts every day doing this work, and having this injury forced you to stop doing that, forced you to go slower,
Yeah,
and take
yeah.
a break. And you know, uh, I mean, would we refer to that as emotional? I think it made you. So to me, like L5S1, L5 to me, it supports the whole of the rest of the spine. So that's about your ability to support yourself. S1, it's the first segment of the sacrum. The sacrum is all about rhythm and flow. the number one is about initiation, is about starting things. To me, when you have an issue at S1, it's saying, you need to initiate change, a new rhythm, a new creative process, a new approach to things. So you were forced into that, by what happened to you. So yeah, okay, your knowledge, existing knowledge, really helped in your healing. Maybe if you had of put more emphasis on the emotional component, maybe you could have healed even quicker.
Yeah, yeah, I have thought that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. So, for someone listening right now who's been told that their pain is just wear and tear, or that surgery is their only option, what would you say to help them understand? You know, there may be another layer to explore.
Yeah. Well, there's something I really want to say here. I know you often ask, guests on this show to define pain,
Mm.
what pain is. And I've been thinking about this a lot. Like you know, I understand some of the, more scientific explanations behind it. But I've been really thinking about this, kind of in preparation to coming and speaking to you. And I actually had another kind of epiphany whilst in the shower about this. Um,
Sounds like you have lots of showers.
I have lots of showers, yeah. So what I came up with, I'll try and explain this the best I can. So I believe like pain is to do with the actual or potential loss of something of who we are or who we think we are, right? So that could be physical. It could be like losing a part of your body. You cut yourself, you lose a few skin cells and some blood cells, and or it could be, if it's an emotional, a kind of loss of a part of yourself or your sense of your identity. Um, Now, healing is the opposite. Healing is about becoming more whole. The word itself comes from the root, the same meaning as the word whole. So healing is about becoming more of who you are, or allowing, more of your true self to come into being. Um, you know, um, so I think, so our nervous system, our body and mind prioritize survival. We're always prioritizing our survival. If we perceive a threat to survival, we feel pain to kind of alert us to the threat. Okay. Um, but we'll always feel the most pain related to the greatest threat to our survival. So I was listening to Paul Chek's podcast yesterday. He was talking about, hanging off of, when he was rock climbing, hanging off a rock and his hands being ripped to shreds. I can think of examples where I've like we could use that as an example. You could be hanging off a rock face, and there could be a sheer drop beneath you, and your fingers are being ripped to shreds. And if that was the only thing happening, that'd be really painful, right? But because of the adrenaline and because of the urgency of if you let go, it's not just your fingers that hurt. Your whole body's, you could potentially kill yourself. Your whole
Yeah,
your whole body, you're gonna, your whole body's gonna fall and hit the floor, right? So, in that moment, you're not aware of the pain in the fingers. You're more aware of the danger of actually falling. Um, so I love acronyms. Like I have the reset. So I came up with it. I thought, what's an acronym for pain? So what I came up with, it's prioritized apparent incompleteness notification. Right. So uh, you know, it's prioritized because it gets brought to the forefront of our attention. Right. It's apparent because it's perceived. It's what we perceive as being a threat to our survival. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Sometimes we can feel tremendous pain, maybe from a breakdown of a relationship, but it's not going to kill us, but it feels like it is, right? Um, so prioritized apparent incompleteness, the potential for incompleteness, the potential for losing a part of ourselves, either a physical part of ourselves or, an emotional part of ourselves. And in shamanic practices, they have a, process of soul retrieval. When we undergo trauma, it's thought that, the soul potentially can attempt to leave the body to not undergo the trauma. And then you have to piece that back together, to be able to properly process things. So it's prioritized apparent incompleteness notification. It's a notification that there's a danger or a harm that, we could lose a part of ourselves and we could slip into, one of Carolyn Miss's survival archetypes. I can't remember them all, but the saboteur, the prostitute, the I can't remember.
child.
Yeah, the inner child. especially if we've already been living as one of these archetypes, in our ordinary lives. If you think back to a few years ago, a lot of people lost themselves to an ideology of fear. You know, whilst there was other people that were able to recognize this potential for losing themselves, and they actually found more of themselves. You know, um, it was such an extreme and unprecedented situation that we all found ourselves in. And as a result of that, this contrast became really obvious, and it created division. And, those that slipped into those archetypes slipped further into those archetypes because they started to believe that was who they were, and they doubled down for fear of losing that false identity. And those who found more of their true selves, were empowered to become more sovereign, to really, be who they are, you know. And that allowed them to see more of what was happening. So it's quite interesting. Like, as a society, we were kind of being coerced into sort of nocebo-oriented thinking, like act like you have it. We had the
Mm,
big posters on the bus stops,
yeah.
which is crazy.
Mm. Well,
It's
it's clever mind control.
clever mind control because it created a belief that our God-given immune system wasn't enough to protect us. Whereas those of us that trusted in ourselves and our bodies, and were able to kind of utilize the fear of losing a part of ourselves as a catalyst for finding more of ourselves. So I think pain is a kind of fear of the potential loss of a part of ourselves, on one level, on a more spiritual level, I would say.
Mm. So, what would you say to those that have been told that their pain is just wear and tear or they need surgery?
So I think it's really important to always seek a second opinion. I think it's really important to do your research. I don't think you should ever go with the first diagnosis or the first suggestion that you get. I really think it's important to speak to different people and to you know listen to your own intuition and yeah, not just let your fear push you into what might seem like the only option at the time. I've got so many examples of, I've declined 4 surgeries myself. I've had clients with, already scheduled knee surgery that have ended up canceling the surgery because they didn't need it. I've had clients who were supposed to have reconstructive jaw surgery that went back to the orthodontist and was told, "Oh, actually, your jaw's in much better alignment now. You don't need it." You know, so yeah, I would say, really important to not make snap decisions. To speak to other people. Do your research. Um, Try and find someone with a holistic approach to help you, that's not just gonna look at the one issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with regards to, you know, it's just wear and tear, again, just be aware that there's so much research out there showing that there are a lot of people walking around with lots of wear and tear. They're in absolutely no pain whatsoever. So if it was just wear and tear, I mean, there are extreme cases, of course, you know, and, if someone comes to me and I feel like they're beyond, you know, a holistic approach and they do need surgery, I'm not an expert in surgery. There are times when someone showed me an X-ray and it's made me wince, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's not for me to help you. That you probably do need a surgeon to help you."
I have yeah, no, I have supported some of my clients in going in for surgeries. I think sometimes it has been the right choice, and it has really helped. My stepfather has just recently had 2 knee replacements. He's got a new lease of life. He's like a new man. He's going for long walks in the country and loving it, and he was in a mobility scooter, so, uh, I definitely think there's a case for having surgery. But I'll tell you another interesting story in relation to what you just said, because, like, as you said, pain doesn't always align with the actual pathology. Sometimes you can see things on a scan and there's no pain, or you can see nothing on a scan and there's tremendous pain. You know, um, One of the first sort of inadvertent healings that I did after having this spiritual awakening, I was actually at the Czech Institute in California. We were waiting for the class to start in the morning. We were doing Tai Chi, and I was sat on the wall with a lady who's since become like a really, uh, very special friend of mine. Um, I didn't know she had a knee issue. My hand was drawn towards her knee. I did something in the energy field of her knee. I didn't know what I was doing. She subsequently told me that she had been scheduled knee surgery. She went back to see the consultant, and she said, I'm not having any pain anymore. I don't want to have this surgery. They actually did another scan or another x-ray, and the pathology was still there, but she had no pain. So, you know, it's, as we said, it's complex.
Yeah, and that's why I think, you do have to look at potential structure, metabolic, nervous system regulation, and emotions. And particularly with persistent pain, I think it is almost always a combination. Can be all four. Um, and as I said earlier, I'm coming more and more to the conclusion that you know conditions that have been going on a long time are more likely to have the primal driver as being emotions. And again, the story that always comes to my mind is one that I've told many times, so you'll be familiar with it, Pete. But ju- just for the audience, a lady that I worked with, she'd had lower back pain and shoulder pain for 27 years. And to cut a very, very long story short, I tracked it back to the fact that she didn't feel she had a good relationship with her mother as a child. And, I coached her to go back home and reach out to her mum, who she had been estranged from for a long time. And as soon as they healed their relationship, the pain in the back and the shoulder went.
Yeah. I think, I think, if you can help someone to heal emotionally, I think not only are they just going to feel better in all aspects of their being, but they're also, like I said earlier, because they, in theory, I believe if you can heal someone emotionally, they're going to love themselves more, and therefore they're going to make better decisions. So any other interventions you make, whether that's corrective exercise, dietary, they're more likely to listen to you, and they're more likely to make good decisions, and they're more likely to adhere, to stick with things and adhere to things once they've got that emotional clarity. Um, so, yes, there's always other factors, but I think if you can address the emotional component, you're actually helping everything else.
Yeah. And I think they all intertwine to a degree. If you affect one, you're going to affect another in some way. If you start eating a better diet, your joints are going to be made from better tissues, as an example, right? And like you were saying earlier, just standing up tall and smiling, right, is going to make you emotionally feel better, right?
Absolutely,
So yeah, we're complex beings, but sometimes the solutions aren't that complex. They can be quite simple.
absolutely.
Awesome, Peter. What's next for you?
Okay, so I'm going to keep doing the work that I'm doing. That's what I love, working with people one on one. I do that both in person in the London area. I've got various locations in the London area where I operate from, but also remotely. I work with people all over the world. And I also have I have a group healing program. I've got one group that I work with at the moment. I've been working with for, gosh, it must be about 5 years now, and they've made tremendous, improvements in all areas. It's incredible, and it's really interesting when you work with a group. Um, there's a sort of coherence that forms, and what I've found is, which is really interesting, because I noticed a long time ago that I would see similar themes occurring in different patients around the same time, which means that we're all subject to, similar influences, whether that's astrological or, whatever that is, things that are going on in the world, you know. So I noticed that very early on. From one week to the next, the themes would change. But what I've noticed with this group is that I'll notice themes occurring in the group, and it will be slightly ahead of everyone else. So it kind of gives me a sense of what's coming because they're so much more coherent now. And I've been working with them for so long, because it's a group setting, I can charge a little bit less, so people stick at it. So, I'm open to forming more of those groups. People can contact me about that. I am trying to write a book. I mentioned it to you earlier. Haven't been as successful as you on that front, but yeah, I had an inspiration to write a book a few years ago. It's kind of about much of what we're talking about, how to apply the principles of what I do to yourself. Um, how to, we were talking about sort of what happened in the last few years where a lot of people kind of deferred to external authority rather than trusting their internal authority. So that's a big theme of my book, is about, people learning to trust their inner authority and, not make these snap decisions. So I'm working on that. So watch this space for that. Um, that's about it really. Trying to
Cool.
trying to heal myself. People can, if people go on my website, that's peterstrange.co.uk. There's an inquiry form on there. They can fill that out. I offer a free initial consultation, just a chance to have a chat, find out more about, what's going on for them, and also for me to explain more about how I might be able to help. So yeah, that kind of covers it.
Awesome. Great stuff. Pete, I've really enjoyed it. I know we've waited a little while, haven't we, for this episode? We had a little technical issue, but we got there in the end, and it was great.
It made me go out and buy a new computer. So
It did.
that was good.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Anything else you want to wrap up with for the audience before you go?
I don't think so. I think it's just, as I said earlier, if you can conceive of a better version of yourself, living a better version of your life, that's the real you. So the thing is to try and tap into the feeling of what that would feel like. Most people aren't really sure of the steps to get there, but if you can get clear on the feeling, if you could imagine yourself as the best version of yourself, living the best version of your life, pain free. Then, how would that feel? And then what you need to do is bring that feeling into the now. Start living that way. Start, cultivating that feeling. Look for every opportunity to feel that feeling. That would be my best advice.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's something I do with all my clients. I tell them to create the vibration of what you're hoping to achieve, but create that vibration now.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, in the emotional work I do with people, I literally get them to connect with that future version of themselves and dialogue with that future version of themselves, and actually take that future version of themselves to go and dialogue with the traumatized versions of themselves from their childhood, and all. It's really powerful work. Uh, and yeah,
Yeah. It reminds. I mean, I'm not a religious man at all, but it does remind me of, in the Bible it says man is made in the image of God. Now, I don't believe that means that God looks like a man. I believe that it means that we all have the power to create our own universe. And that's really what you were just saying.
and we're creating it all the time. We're creating it all the time through our thoughts, words, and actions, or lack of. So everything you think, say, or do, or don't think, say, or do, is creating your perception of reality. So we just need to be more mindful about what we're thinking, saying, and doing.
Absolutely. That's a great way to wrap up the show. So that's it from Peter and me for this week. But be sure to tune in, same time, same place next week on Beyond the Pain. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Pain. If this episode resonated, please follow the show, leave a review, or share it with someone you know who's been struggling. And remember, pain is not permanent. With the right insight and support, you can turn it into power. Until next time, stay open, stay strong, and keep moving beyond the pain.